Did a disciple really become the first pope? That's what I want to talk to you about. How did the message of a small group of Jews end up becoming this massive Catholic church located not in Jerusalem, but in Rome? In today's Power Track session, really what I want to do is talk about three things. I want to address a little bit about how the Catholic Church became what it is. How did Jesus and a couple of guys on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee start something that ended up as a Roman dynastic government? How did some group of people, the Son of Man had no place to lay his head. And now in Rome are some of the nicest digs you'll ever see anybody live in. How did we go from here to here? That's one of the things we want to talk about. The second one is I want to highlight a couple of doctrines of the Catholic faith and faith community and where they've gone with some things and ask the question, how did they get there? And why is there an apparent gap between biblical text and some of those doctrines? And then I want to talk about some practical questions. Now, I got to tell you, I don't think up these topics. They hand them to me. And my first engagement with Catholicism was a little weird. I grew up in an oil refinery town. That's an oil refinery in Paulsboro, New Jersey. I was a South Jersey boy, and if you know anything about that area, South Philly and South Jersey were Italian Catholic dynasty areas. I mean, we had great pizzerias, unbelievable bakeries, and big, big Catholic churches. So at first, I have to say that because there was such a significant population, St. John's Catholic Church was back behind my house. Actually, just behind my house was the Legion Hall, which everybody said was haunted. It was an old, broke-down building that we used to, cause trouble in. And then across the street was the Catholic Church, St. John's. My first encounter with Catholicism was on Mischief Night. If you're not familiar with Mischief Night, in South Jersey, the nights before Halloween are often called Mischief Night, where you decorate people's property with toilet paper like this one, or eggs, or soap. We decided to make St. John's Catholic Church our center of attention, and I got caught. So I spent Halloween during the day cleaning St. John's Catholic Church, and that was my introduction to the Catholic Church. And what I can tell you about that was that and one other thing. We used to play hide and seek in my neighborhood. We had 40 kids on my block. So you could have some awesome kick-the-can games. So we had this tag game that we made up where you had to go hide. And my buddy Mikey convinced me to go inside the Catholic Church. And I got caught. The story of my life. I got caught. There was this little nun. She wasn't like half my size. Now, I don't know if you know anything about nuns, but this lady had this ability to take this little piece of hair right here at the bottom of the back of your head. And I'm telling you, she could grab you and pick it up. She was way down here, but she'd pick it up. She was like a midget nun. And you'd be going, ah! And she'd walk me right out the door. Now, that's how I got introduced to the Catholic Church, so I wouldn't call that scholarly or some way that I could know much about them. Fast forward a few years of my life, and I ended up living in Jerusalem on the Via Dolorosa, working below a convent as an archaeologist. And I was living above the convent of the Sisters of Zion. Now, my mom was happy because she grew up in Catholic school and she knew I wouldn't starve, as if starving was ever really an issue. But I was living up above. Now, I don't care what you've heard about these nuns. I can tell you the truth. Friday night after the Vesper service is the poker game. And they are sharks. Okay, those sweet little looking nuns, when they take them habits off, man, they sit down at the table, they are sharks. At any rate, this was my introduction to Catholicism. So it came in through a little bit of a back door. I was living there working on the archaeology of the basement. I didn't know a lot about them. I knew that they were big on artwork. I knew that whenever you went into their church, there was a little tub of water in the back. I knew that they were really into Mary. Mary showed up everywhere, and Jesus was always dead hanging on a cross. And that's pretty much all I knew about Catholicism. Then I got sent to Rome, and for the next few years I was working in Roman archaeology, and I'm considered a Roman specialist, so Some of my friends hang out in places like the Vatican Library. There are only 26 people who can go in the vaults. One of them is a gal who works on my staff who's works alongside of us in Italy. Her name is Susanna, and she's one of the people that can get access to the oldest documents of the Christian faith. Stefano, one of my other colleagues in the work that I do, has lunch with the Pope, as in lunch with the Pope, which is kind of weird for me, but he's a neat guy. And so I've gotten a kind of a different view. He hangs out with Pope Francis, who's the 266th head of the Catholic Church, and so that's kind of a fun thing. My actual field now is an ancient Roman specialist. These are bodies from Pompeii. They're not actually the bodies, they're plaster casts. When they were digging into Pompeii, they found that there were cavities or spaces, and they found bone material. So they pour into those spaces plaster, then excavate the dirt around them, and get the shape of bodies of people that died in Pompeii. Inside the plastering then are actual skulls, actual teeth. So remember, the flesh burns away, but the bones maintained their integrity as they were buried by Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. So, bottom line is my job now is kind of a weird one. I do what's called interdisciplinary study with geography, anthropology, archaeology, history, and try to tell the story of the ancient Roman people. Now, I'm telling you all that because I had to become familiar with a variety of strange faces and names in order to understand the background of Roman history. So I had to read people like Petronius, who was the Saturday Night Live comic of his first century era, or Martial or Juvenal. These were both kind of salacious writers, guys who wrote some of the stuff that you try to skip in high school and probably get stuck with in college. And then I became very familiar with some of the ancient historians, Tacitus and some of the lesser like Suetonius and others. The bottom line is, if you're going to understand an ancient Roman, you have to understand what was on their newsstand and what was in their theater. And some of you are sitting there going, what does that have to do with Catholicism? Well, the bottom line is that when the gospel came to Rome, Rome was a thing. It was dynasties. It was deep commitment to certain values. And the gospel went in, hit those values, and became enculturated. They changed so that when the gospel came to Rome, Rome adapted the gospel. As much as Christianity came into Rome, Romanism came into Christianity. And as a result, that means you're going to have to know two things if you're going to understand how the Catholic Church got the way it is. You're going to have to understand the history of the Roman people and a little bit about who received the message and what they were like and what their values were like. For instance, if you think you're very much like the Romans, let me ask you, do you think that it would be acceptable in a main circle in downtown Washington to have a huge nude statue of President Trump? But there is one in downtown Rome in antiquity of the emperor. A big nude statue of the emperor. When you left your dorm, when you walked out your door today, you didn't act like a Roman. When you walked out your door as an ancient Roman, the last thing you did after you said goodbye to your mama, after you said goodbye to everybody you love, is you said goodbye to your ancestors. And you did it every time you left the door. And every time you walked in your house, you said hello to your ancestors before you hugged your wife and children. And you always went out with your right foot first because you never want to get started on your left foot. So you mention your ancestors as you put your right foot over the threshold. Every Roman did that because that's the right way to do it. What are you, a Neanderthal? Of course you do it that way. So when the gospel hit a group of people, it didn't hit a vacuum. It hit a group of people that had a set of values. And what I'm trying to get you to see is there are two histories, early church history and Roman history. You have to understand if you're going to understand how Catholicism came together. If you have a Bible, you can look always in the last chapter of Romans chapter 16, and you get a little idea of the flavor of where the Roman church began. It began with a group of people, and there's a whole litany in Romans 16. It's a weird passage. You hardly ever hear it preached. And the reason is it's like names of people and who they are to Paul. And ironically, it tells us something about Rome. In Romans 16, almost all the names of the people that are mentioned are not from Rome. So it's as though, in fact, the first four that are mentioned, and then a couple after them, are mentioned. These are names of people, names like Phoebe, Priscilla, Aquila, Epaenetus, later on Andronicus and Junia down in verse 7. In chapter 16, what it says is that all these people came to Jesus Christ and then moved to Rome. Why? Because the gospel thrived in the countryside. Jesus spoke in ways that country folk could understand. He talked about nets and fish and birds and trees, and this was kind of the stuff of country living. But to get the gospel into the cities, people had to be deliberate about walking it in. I would argue the same is true today. Because people in a cosmopolitan city environment are used to lots of different ideas, not one way that's right, but many different ideas about how things are right. To get the gospel into the city, there had to be a deliberate intent. And as a result, what happens is people like Phoebe, who comes from Caesarea near Corinth, or people like Priscilla and Aquila, who got kicked out of Rome and then went back and actually risked their life to come back because they were Jewish believers. Some of these people on this list are people who spent a lot of their life outside of Rome. You have to understand that to a Roman, Rome is not a city. It's an idea. It's a value system. To be a Roman. There's a great old story about a soldier during the period in which the Roman Republic was dying and the empire was rising. And this guy decided that he was going to kill this guy who was a tyrant. He wanted to make sure that there were no dictators or tyrants in Rome. The problem is he was better at his values and morals than he was at eyesight. He actually killed the guy's bodyguard but didn't kill him. And he got caught, and they dragged him into a tribunal. And there was a candle right there in front of the guy who was putting him on trial. And the man walked up, and he held his hand over the candle until the flesh of his hand was burning. And he stood there, and he let his hand burn. And he said, I am a Roman. It is the nature of a Roman not to flinch. Rome was an idea. It was a set of values. And as a result, when you look at Romans 16, you find that a lot of the people came to Christ and then moved to Rome to bring the gospel there. Then there's other people, like in 16:6, there's this lady named Mary, 16:8, Ampliatus, 9, Urbanus, Stachys, Apelles, Aristobulus, other people that we don't know exactly what their background is, but in many cases, these are people that have Greek background names. They come from a pagan background and they came to Christ. So Romans 16 gives you sort of a kickoff for the handful of house churches. Now, if you're going to understand how we get to the Catholic Church, you have to understand what the early church looked like. In the New Testament, you didn't take your chariot, run over to the parking lot, park your chariot, and go into the service. That wasn't a church. Churches met in Roman villas. They were small houses. They met in the area inside the house. And they generally met sometime between 3:30 and 5:30 in the morning. Now, between 3:30 and 5:30 in the morning, I don't even sound male, let alone Christian. Okay, I'm just saying. Like, there ain't going to be any singing because I'm not hitting any notes between 3:30 and 5:30. The point is that half of the Christian church was made up of people who came from the ranks of slavery. And because they did, they were working all day long from sunup to sundown. You couldn't have a church service when they couldn't show up. The problem is that it's against the law in Roman law and what's called the Juris law system. It's against the law for any group to meet secretively at night, especially if they collect an offering. So the earliest Christians were not persecuted because of the belief in Jesus. The Romans didn't care what they believed. They cared that they met at night and took an offering, and that's against the law. So they ended up literally being jailed for something that we don't even think about anymore. But it was because it was the only practical way. You have to remember, if you walk down the street in Rome in the first century, only about 10% of the people are literate. That means 9 out of 10 people can't read. If you look down the street, almost 50% of everybody that you would see was a slave. How do you know them? Well, free Romans all wear the same uniform. It's a kind of an off-white toga. It's called the toga virilis. Everybody wears one. Men don't go, but I have a ball team and I want to put that. You don't do that. You wear the same thing. It says, I'm a free Roman, and it's a toga. Does everybody know what a toga looks like? Okay, the problem with a toga is you wrap it, it goes down your legs, and then it comes up and goes over your arm, right? So how do you get work done if you're walking around with a towel over your arm? Answer, you don't. You're a free Roman. Work is for other people. So you walk around in a toga because you're saying, I don't work, I'm a Roman. The other half of the people that you see, the half are a toga crowd, the other half are a tunic crowd. That's the people that wear something that only goes down to here and shows their legs. If you show your legs, you're a working stiff. If you have a metal belt or a metal collar, you're a slave. So I can look straight down the street and I can see who everybody is just by how they're dressed. Slaves don't walk up and talk to free Romans, and free Romans don't normally walk up and talk to slaves. Everybody's got... Why are there so many slaves running around on the street? Because everything has to be bought every day fresh in order for you to have fresh food in the house. There's no refrigeration. So every morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, just after the sun rises, or just about time the sun is rising, the slaves are getting up, heading out to the market to get everything that the owners are going to eat, including breakfast. They got to get home, make the fires, and get the breakfast up before the people with the togas wake up. The important thing for you to understand is that's the world that gets the gospel. And when it does, the end of Romans 16 says 3 things. If you could see Romans 16:17, it says, I urge you, brothers and sisters, watch out for those who cause divisions and put obstacles in your way, contrary to the teaching that you have learned. So that the idea is, be careful, there's going to be wolves in sheep's clothing. The local church then met in little houses. One guy who was the pastor of the church at Ephesus. You go to Ephesus, who was the pastor of the church at Ephesus? Well, Timothy was toward the end of the New Testament. But that didn't mean that he showed up and they mic'd him up and he got his PowerPoint ready and they came into the hall. That's not what a pastor did. He's the head of a group of, say, 5 guys. Each of those 5 guys learned the Bible from Tim. Tim teaches them. They have house churches. They're elders that lead in a house church. But the church at Ephesus is all 5 meetings. Does that make sense? If something happened in our country and the church was driven underground, as it's happening in Damascus right now in Syria, what happens is people don't go to the church building. They break up and different elders have studies in their homes. But somebody has to control what the church is learning. And so the pastor becomes the head of the Bible study leaders. The Bible study leaders become the elders, and they gather people in their home. That's what the early church looked like. That is until it got to Rome. Now, what's important for us is that they were warned, be careful, things are going to go the wrong way. Not only that, but they needed some encouragement. I read in Romans 16:19, everybody has heard about your obedience, so I rejoice because of you. But I want you to be wise about what is good and innocent about what is evil. The Bible says that you don't have to know what all the dirty jokes mean. It's really okay if stuff goes flying by and you didn't catch it. You need to be wise about the world in terms of doing good. But you can be innocent about the evil thing. Have you ever talked with people that are so annoying because everything you say has some double meaning? They're giggling at you the whole time, and you're just trying to tell a story. You're not trying to be funny. I would say that if you look at Rome, they were taught that they needed some encouragement, but in addition to encouragement, they needed to be wise as it regarded doing good. And then he finishes the letter, and he says, the prime objective we've always had, the prime objective we've had from the beginning, is to establish you according to the gospel, the message I proclaimed about Jesus. The point was, Paul was deliberate about carrying the message to them. Okay, now with that background, I want to think very quickly about Roman history, and I want to do it on one foot. The rabbis had a saying at the time of Jesus, if you asked your rabbi a question, because some rabbis, like pastors and youth pastors, get long-winded. You don't know any, but the point is that you'd ask your rabbi, Rabbi, can you tell me while standing on one foot the answer to my question? So this is kind of the one-foot Roman history. When you talk about the ancient Romans, it's about 1,000 years. About 500 to 0 is Republic, about 0 to 500 AD is Empire. I'm fudging a little bit on my dates, but basically from about 509 and the establishment of the Republic all the way to 23 BC and the rise of a guy by the name of Octavian, there is the Republic of Rome. From that second half, the gospel is largely rooted just during the time of the change between a Roman Republic and a Roman emperor. Now, why do you care about that? Well, I want you to think about the main issue if you're a Roman. Let's say you just took over the world from Scotland to Saudi Arabia. You're on 3 continents. You've got a huge Mediterranean Sea right in the middle. There's no singular language. A guy from Scotland can't sing happy birthday to you to a guy on the edge of the Saudi desert, but they're both Romans. What makes you a Roman when you're different colors, when you're different backgrounds, when you're 23 different languages and you're all Romans? How do you maintain cohesiveness when nobody comes from the same background? How do you do it? Because this is going to have everything to do with where the Catholic Church goes. How do you maintain cohesive? That's the single biggest problem ancient Romans have. And so here's what they do. I wear a couple things on my body that are Roman coins. In the ancient world, the Roman coin was a billboard. When you wanted to get a message out to people, you minted a coin. And because it was the government, usually the coin says the opposite of whatever's really true. It's a government thing. So if the front of the coin says peace and prosperity, and they mint 1 million of them and send them out all over the Roman Empire, it means there's going to be a war. If it says filled grain storehouses, it means buy up your bread because you're going to starve. Whatever they tell you on the front is usually not what's going to happen. But the message given by the government wasn't put on billboards, it was put on coins because they spread everywhere. That's how you got a message running around. Do you remember from geography, what did the ancient Romans call the Mediterranean Sea? Mare Nostrum. Mare Nostrum means our sea. The Romans believed that they were the exceptional people of the world that came to settle everything and bring salvation and cultural salvation to everyone. And the way they did it was they took over everything. Now, if you have no common heritage and you have no singular language and your masses are separated by seas and mountains, how do you put everybody together? This is what Roman emperors did. So they did this following quick steps. First, they defined all the urban spaces. When you think of the Roman Empire, think of McRome. You go into a McDonald's, you know exactly what they sell. You're not going into a McDonald's thinking, hey, I'm thinking pizza. You don't walk back by the restrooms and stand there and wait for somebody to take your order. You know exactly where to go. Walk into a Walmart and here's what you know. A Walmart is a Walmart is a Walmart. I don't know much about that, but I can go into a Home Depot. And I can find tools. I don't even know what they do, but I need them. And all I can tell you is, I know exactly I know where the nails are going to be. I know where things are. Okay, that kind of franchising is Roman. What they did was they built urban cities, and every city looked like the other one. By the way, Americans are very Roman. I traveled. This month, I think I'm in 6 different states. I'm zipping around. Now you wake up, you drive down the road, you can't tell what city it is. Because there's a Walgreens next to a Walmart, next to a CVS, next to a Home Depot, next to a Kentucky Fried Chicken, right by the Golden Arches. You're driving along and it's just like everything you've ever seen in America before. But that's familiar. There's a good feeling about the familiar. So my point is, that's what they did. Now, how did they pass on values? What's the oldest trick for passing on values? theater, sports. So the government sponsored the theater, the government sponsored the ludi, the games, and taught you values, taught you what was important through Hollywood? Exactly. They enculturated the people through their entertainment. And they got people to believe things that they used to think were wrong became right because they became popular. And it's a very old ploy. Now, all of this you patiently waited for, but here's what happens to the Roman Empire. As it gets later, Rome starts to fall apart. From the year 235 to the year 285 AD, there are 35 different emperors. It becomes hazardous to be an emperor. In other words, the fastest way to die is be an emperor, because you're going to get bumped off and killed. Here's what I want you to see. As a result, Rome is starting to fall apart. So they're looking for a savior. More and more people in the slave population had received Jesus Christ. And these people were different than everybody else. When there was a battle and everybody left the dead, the believers would come out and care for the dead. You know, believers did weird things. Instead of burning bodies, they buried them because they believed there would be a resurrection. And all of a sudden, cemeteries became dormitories. The word dormitory means the place of sleeping. And they stopped looking at death the same way. And they started talking about another world and one God. To a Roman, there were many gods. There were little numinous spirits that became... Have you ever seen any Roman art where you see these fat, chubby little angels with these wings? They're called putti. Okay, those are numina from before Jesus. They become angels after, because you don't change the artwork when you change your faith, because the artwork was expensive, so you just update what it means. That's, by the way, how Jesus got a halo. There was a big, beautiful temple called the Temple of Helios. Helios, like the sun. And Helios was in the center, and he had beams of light coming off of his head. It was a beautiful mosaic. They spent a bloody fortune on it. Well, then they came to Jesus, and they said, well, call it Jesus. That's how he got his first halo. So Helios just, changed his name, because it was a lot easier to keep the artwork and change the names. If I took you to Santa Maria Maggiore, the largest church of Mary in Italy. Underneath of it was a fertility shrine. A shrine to a fertile woman before the story of Mary came. In other words, you just bond in whatever we worship on the corner of Main and Elm. Yes, but they changed the God. That's okay. We worship on the corner of Main and Elm. And all of a sudden, they just adopted the Roman army, the Roman census system, the Roman legal system. These were all designed to help you feel it's good to be a Roman. If I got off of a ship in Rome, I saw 3 statues. If I got on a ship in Rome, I saw those 3 statues. I went off to another port, I got off, I saw the same 3 statues. Why? It's all Rome. We run the world, it's all us. This universalism is a Roman idea. Now, why did I tell you all this stuff about ancient Romans? It's important for you to understand something. The Great Transformation happened in about the 4th century. If you take a look at the top, that's from a movie that has a bunch of senators and the emperor and a bunch of senators. Look at the colors they're wearing. Now look at the cardinals of the Catholic Church. Do you know how they got those colors? In the year 476, Rome fell apart. The Magyars and the Huns, they came in and they wiped the place out. As a result, somebody had to keep the lights on and keep the water moving. So who took over? The church. And up to that time, the title of the emperor was Pontifex Maximus, the head of the bridges. Guess who Pontifex Maximus became? The Pope. Senators and prefects dressed in red and white. Cardinals now dress in red and white and wear red shoes and little red beanies. Those are the same uniforms of the guys before them. The newsman, who was called an orator, who stood on the street corner and said, and now the news, became a priest. It had nothing to do with theological training at all. It meant he had a louder voice. So they installed him as the local priest. All of a sudden, every day as a pagan Roman, you used to burn incense to your household lares, the guys, the kind of the spirits that took care of your storehouse. And then you would burn in front of the death masks of your ancestors, worshiping the memory of your ancestors. Well, what happened when the Christ came? What happened when the gospel came? Do you realize when you walk into a group of people and tell them that you can give them the gospel and now they will know and live eternally, do you realize what you just said about all their ancestors before them that never heard the gospel? If every day you worship the gospel, how would you feel about being told all of your ancestors that you've been praying to every day and lighting candles to every day are in hell? Ask the missionaries to places like Japan where the gospel is barely permeated. One of the biggest problems of the gospel is it sets people free who believe, but it condemns those who didn't. And so, in Hebrews, the writer of the Hebrews said, you have a family. This hall of fame of faith in Hebrews 11. And so all of a sudden, your household worship went to saints, not relatives. All of a sudden, you began to light candles in front of pictures of saints instead of lighting candles in front of masks of your ancestors. You used to believe that there were numinous spirits, little fairies that were all over. Now you picture the same picture, but now they're angels. It's an old idea, married to a couple of passages in the Bible. Can I just tell you, we have no idea if Michael looks fat. We have no idea if they all look like, 2-year-olds in bad need of a diet. We have no idea what angels really look like, but we know what they look like in our work. All of a sudden, the basilica that used to be the word for a law court in Rome was where you got justice, and a basilica became known as a church building. And everything that was ancient Roman turns into something that's Catholic. All I'm trying to get you to see is when Catholicism started, it started because Christianity bumped into a Roman way of thinking. And what came out of it was Roman Christianity. That's why we call it the Roman Catholic Church. It was a government before it was a spiritual movement. And unfortunately, what happens when you start off that way? Well, a couple of things we can say about that. There are some core beliefs that will come out of that. The basic beliefs, you have to remember something about, by the way, this works in Italy too. You got to remember something about the Italians. If there's an easy way to do it, they don't do it that way. You know why? Because they've been doing it for thousands of years, so it's very, very complicated. And honestly, my first group that showed up there, the bus pulled in, and he pulled in such a way that all of the people had to stand in the middle of the street with the traffic going by to put their luggage on, instead of turning the bus the other way, where you could put the people on the sidewalk and they could put their luggage in. So I stopped and I asked the driver, I said to him, why in the world are you pulling the bus in this way? Everybody's got to stand in traffic to put their luggage in. He goes, that's the way it's done. If you understand that, you understand the Roman way. Because we got thousands of years of this is the way it's done, and it's very, very complicated. All of Roman core beliefs, Roman church core beliefs, are from 3 creeds. One of them called the Apostles' Creed, one the Nicene Creed, and another one called the Athanasian Creed. They tell them what their doctrinal statement is. Beyond that, there's also the encyclicals. These are the statements by the papacy, the Pope, that tell them what morality is. And then they have the liturgy, which tells you how to pray and exactly how to approach God and how to go back to the confessional room and what you're supposed to do. That's all set in a legal system. And then there's prayer that is all prescribed and written down, because ancient Romans never prayed off the cuff. Oh, I don't know, maybe the ship wasn't going down and they said, help God. Maybe that was. But for the most part, ancient Romans prayed and they hired people to play music in the background, so that the god or gods they were talking to wouldn't get their voice mixed up with someone else's and mess up their prayer. The ancient Roman had no idea of an omniscient, omnipotent God. So when the God of the Bible becomes part of their life, they're not sure how to make adjustments for him. So someone tells you how to write out your prayer and construct it. Now, what are the problems with that? Well, there's a lot of different things we could talk about, but there's some problematic doctrines in the church. One of them is going to be apostolic succession. Did Jesus intend to tell Paul that intend to tell Peter that he would pass on this special papal authority to the next guy, to the next guy, to the next guy, 266 times until Francis became the Pope? Was that Jesus' intention, apostolic succession? The other one is that the prayer to saints, the prayer to Mary, infant baptism, the idea that somebody could pay a certain amount for an indulgence and make their way to heaven. If you get down to it, here's the basic fundamental difference between what I would call evangelical Christianity, of which I belong, and Catholicism. It's down to one thing. All the rest of it doesn't matter, because this is the one thing. Is Jesus alone enough to get me to heaven? Did the blood of Jesus effectively cancel my sin? Does my belief in Jesus' blood to take away my sin, is that enough before God? Do I need that plus anything else? Now let me ask you a question. Can you be a pro-abortion evolutionist and be a Christian? How many of you would say yes? Okay, hands down. How many of you say no? You can't do that. How many of you are going, I ain't sticking my hand up, I don't care what you ask me to do. But you put your hand up, see? Okay, here's the point. Jesus didn't say that you believe in me plus creation, and then you'll go to heaven. He didn't say you believe in me plus the dignity of human life, and then you'll go to heaven. Now, hear me closely. I believe in creation, and I believe in the dignity of human life, without apology. I believe those are biblical and those are right. I believe when God speaks, nobody else's opinion matters. But I'm going to tell you this. You can be wrong about everything, and not be wrong about one thing and get to heaven. You can absolutely be the worst speller in the world, terrible at math, and have lousy morals. But if you know truly know Jesus Christ as your Savior, that's the beginning point of going to heaven. Because the day you came to Christ, you were messed up in lots of areas that you know you were messed up now, but you didn't know that day. Salvation is of the submission of the will. It's not about how much I know. It's about how much I give. Do I give my heart to Jesus? It's always been about that. So that you can have virtually there's a guy on a cross next to Jesus. He's got nothing to offer. He can't bring fame to Jesus. He's on a cross. He's going to die. He can't give him fortune because he can't even reach his pocket. He's hanging on a cross. There's no power he can ascribe to Jesus that Jesus doesn't have. He's got nothing. There's no pleasure he can give to Jesus. They're hanging on a cross next to one another. And without any fortune, fame, power, or pleasure, still Jesus said, today you'll be with me in paradise. Because it's not about your ability to perform. It's only about whether or not you have given your heart to Jesus. That's all he could give. That's all Jesus needed. Game over. So the point is that people will ask all the time, what about all these doctrines? And then they'll come to the place where they'll say, are Catholics saved? And I will say, some are and some aren't. Just like all the Baptists, Presbyterians, Methodists. It doesn't matter what label you're wearing, it matters who paid for your sin. Salvation isn't about whether or not I'm theologically correct. Please. The number of people running around our churches that have a theology as deep as a matchbook cover is unbelievably big. So they're walking around saying, no weapon formed against me will stand. Tell Jim Elliot, because he got killed. Fox's Book of Martyrs is filled with people that had weapons that formed against them that didn't stand. What, were they bad on Isaiah? Come on! If it has to be that I have to understand all the verses of Scripture correctly to get to heaven, then the gospel isn't just about receiving Jesus. It's about knowing 1,189 chapters of Scripture well. Now here's what you didn't hear me say. Get lazy and don't know them. be immoral and don't worry about it. I'm not saying that, because people always hear the wrong thing. Seriously, I get up in a message and I say something about abortion, and the 4 ladies who had one go out weeping, and the 3 girls who are about to have one don't even hear it. The wrong people hear everything we say. I'm not telling you not to have your theology correct, not to study to show yourself a workman that's approved and need not be ashamed. And I'm not saying that some people shouldn't be ashamed of the way they talk about the Bible, because they don't know what they're talking about. What I'm saying is, the line between saved and not, the line between in heaven and not, is not which church you showed up to on Sunday morning, or whether you stood when they stood and sat when they sat, or ate their wafer. That's not the issue. The issue is, do you know Jesus Christ is your personal Savior? And that thief on the cross demonstrates that there's nothing else you have to do. One guy came to me and goes, well, I believe you have to be baptized in addition to that. And I said, no, you don't. He said, yes, I do. I said, no, you don't. 2 guys are in a foxhole. They're almost out of bullets. They're surrounded by guys coming up the hill. One's a believer, the other one's not. Sorry, Charlie, I give you the gospel, but I can't baptize you, so you're just going to have to be in hell. Oh, well, no, Randy, see, God would make an exception for that guy. Like the thief on the cross, he'd make an exception. I said, okay, wait a minute. 2 guys are in a foxhole. One guy knows Jesus and turns to the other. Are you a good person? Yeah, well, then you'll go to heaven. No, Randy, see, he has to receive Jesus. And I said, well, then one is a requirement, and things with an exception are not required. You don't believe it's required that he be baptized. You believe it's convenient that he be baptized. My point is very simple. In the Catholic Church, they don't mean to have 50 things that they believe that aren't in the Bible, because they started off trying to write a new Bible. The problem was, when you dropped the gospel into the Roman world, they made it Roman. That means they're better at charity than us. You know why? Because they're a government. They understand how to work on a governmental level. Man, I'm telling you right now, I'm working right now with Syrian refugees. I got to tell you something. You want to get out there and really make a difference in world refugee crises, you're going to need the Vatican's help. Because they can show up with trucks and people, and you're not going to believe the kinds of things they can marshal. Franklin Graham, he's a pretty good second, but I'm telling you right now, these guys have been in government for 1,000 years. They know how to do it. The problem with that is, when you start off the gospel by adapting to the culture, do you know what happened to the Catholic Church? Everywhere they went, whatever the culture was, they tried to adapt the gospel to it. They became a series of Our Lady of stories. If you know anything about the Catholic Church, you know that Mary showed up and popped out of the mountains of Brazil. She popped out of the Mediterranean Sea. She's all over the place. Mary has been seen more than Elvis after her death. The point is that all of a sudden it's people trying to massage and bond in the local community. The weakness is, it's going to be tough to take the Bible and stand on the Bible when you're so busy making the culture accept your message at the expense of your message. The strength is, you got a long history and lots of tentacles, and let's just be honest, Catholics know how to build. I mean, seriously, we're building gymnatoriums and they got cathedrals that'll drop your socks. You know what I'm saying? They know how to build. They got a long, deep history. Before you walk out of here and go, is it all bad? Let me just say that the earliest manuscripts of what we have of our faith, the New Testament itself, are sitting in the Vatican. The repository of early Christianity is sitting in their libraries. So be nice. At the same time, let me say this. I don't believe that it's necessary for you to understand everything theologically, but you must know that the gospel is God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. Not whoever believes in him and does these 15 other things. And the Epistle of the Galatians was written to simply say, the gospel plus nothing equals salvation. The gospel plus nothing equals salvation. You don't need a priest, you don't need a pope, you don't need a fashionable way to be baptized. You don't need a wafer. You need Jesus plus nothing equals salvation. And ultimately, no. A disciple didn't start off as a kid from the North Shore of the Sea of Galilee and end up as a pope running around in the Pope Mobile. That's not what happened. But the message innocently went into a culture and was adapted by that culture dramatically so that it was no longer easy for them to distinguish what part of it is Roman and what part of it is Christian. One final challenge. I work in missions, and I can tell you that one of the greatest problems we have with Americans that go to a mission field is that they have a hard time separating their Americanism from their Christianity. We walk into a place and we start trying to make them like us because we intrinsically believe if the world could get their act together, they'd all be like us. The problem is democracy doesn't work everywhere. Democracy doesn't save, Jesus does. But as a government, we go to bring democracy. As a Christian, I go to bring Jesus. And if I don't separate those two things, I'm going to hit a wall. And believe me, all over the Middle East, we turned it into democracies, and they turned it into Muslim Brotherhood. That's my neighborhood. I know it well. And I can tell you it's a disaster. What they need is Jesus Christ. Before you go, can I just say one last thing? You can't stop me because I'm here. Where do we go? I mean, what do we do with this? I mean, okay. I was listening to Francis Chan the other day, and he was talking about where would you go if you were looking for answers to your problem. He said, if I was looking for answers, and I was really on the edge of my life, and I really wanted to know what's the truth, where would I go? Would I go to a Bible study where they sat and argued about infralapsarianism and supralapsarianism and Calvinism and Arminianism? Is that what would attract me, that would really stir my heart and give me an answer? Would I go to a church where people had split 4 other times from other churches because they didn't like this color of the carpet or they didn't think that pastor was doing his job? Where would I go to find the answer? And he came down to a single point and it stuck in my heart, so I'm going to stick it in yours. I would go for somebody who Jesus was so changing that they understood what it meant to bow before the Savior and be in love with Him. That's who I would go to. That's a person whose life has changed. That's what I'm looking for. The institutions, they're not going to change the world. Transform people, change the world. Thanks, Lord, for the opportunity to be together and for the few minutes that we get to spend in a difficult subject. I pray that we were not harsh, but kind, but that we were not soft, but true. In Jesus' name, amen.